Hey Min, gonna be reviewing some Marvel movies. Wanna come? What's up guys, welcome to another video on AJ's Thoughts on Movies. Today we're gonna be going over Phase 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I recently rewatched all of the Phase 3 Marvel movies, and today we're going to be ranking them from the worst to the best. Make sure you drop a like on this video, comment down below if you guys have any other opinions about these movies or anything you want to talk about, but let's get into it. Alright, so kicking things off in last place, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now I know this is kind of an unpopular opinion, a lot of people like this movie. I'm not really one of them. I feel like this movie is the definition of a one-off. It's really cool when you watch it in the theaters and the jokes land and it's really funny. But rewatching this is my third time seeing this movie and it just didn't land the same as it used to. I feel like this movie is almost like the difference between The Office and like How I Met Your Mother, where we have a laugh track and we don't have a laugh track. And this is a movie with a laugh track. It tells us when to laugh by showing us characters laughing at their own jokes. We have different moments where Drax is just laughing out loud and that's supposed to be funny, and then we have different moments where Rocket is just laughing out loud at Taserface and that's supposed to be funny. And parts of it are. I'm not taking away from that, but it doesn't create a good movie in my opinion. Another problem I have with this movie is the story, and more specifically how it flows. I think that the opening for this movie is actually really cool, and the music, like in the first movie, is actually what carries the film. I didn't think that a soundtrack could get better than the first movie, but it does. I like this music even more than the first movie. I downloaded Volume 2. But there are some just inescapable problems in this movie. One, there's not really a villain in this movie until the very, very, very end, like the last 30 minutes. We don't have an antagonist. We don't have a reason why the Guardians are doing what they're doing. It's just, will Peter Quill get the father that he always wanted? And like, that's endearing and all, but for a Marvel movie, it just doesn't hit home for me. We have characters like the Sovereign that try to act like a villain, but they're really just an obstacle in the way of the Guardians. Also, can we talk about how James Gunn thinks that all aliens are just regular people painted a different color? We've got the Kree that are just blue people painted. Then we have the Xandarians that are pink. And then we have the Sovereign that are gold. Gamora's green. Like, it just seems kind of lazy at some point. But yeah, like I said, the Sovereign is just, it's not enough for me. They're kind of just an obstacle, and they're a story tool to create conflict. I think that Ego is a good villain, but we don't know that he's the villain until the very, very end. So I do think that the last act in the movie and the final battle is actually really cool. I think the CGI effects are on point, and I think that the characters have some good dialogue with each other, and it's pretty funny. But that's not the whole movie. That's not what makes a great Marvel film. I've never really sat down and said, I want to watch Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. And for that reason, I think Guardians deserves last place on my list. Up next, we have Captain Marvel. It's a story about Carol Danvers as she's trying to rediscover her memories of a life that she once had on Earth. And we get that fish out of water comedy. And there are some really cool effects where they de-age Samuel L. Jackson and Clark Gregg. When I watched this movie in the theater, I came out of it very disappointed. I didn't think it was a very good movie at all. I didn't think that the humor landed. I didn't think Brie Larson did a very good job of playing Captain Marvel, or at least not the Captain Marvel that we know from comic book adaptations and different television shows. But after I saw this film again, I kind of had a change of heart. I actually think I got more of what the story's supposed to be. I was getting upset at Brie Larson not bringing emotion to her character, but her character is kind of emotionless. It's her way of trying to control her powers, as Yon-Rogg says in the beginning, where she's supposed to control her emotions and not give in to them, almost like a Jedi aspect. I don't think that this movie has that humor quality that most MCU movies have. It's kind of like Incredible Hulk in that way, where it takes itself really seriously, and it's more of like that spy, almost X-Files type. But I think that this movie does have its merits. I think that Ben Mendelsohn steals the show, honestly. I think he does a great job at playing Talos. I think that that twist of having the Skrulls be good and the Kree be bad is something we didn't see coming, especially in the comic books. The Skrull are definitely the bad ones. They invade Earth all the time. They mess with the Fantastic Four. And so it's kind of cool to have your expectations subverted a little bit. And there is a lot of emotion in that Talos just wants to find his family and relocate the Skrull to a different planet. This movie does have a political agenda, and it's not trying to hide that at all. Brie Larson says so, the director says so. They're trying to send a message. That's cool. I don't care about that. You can do it one way or the other. But I want a good story, I want good characters, and I want to care about this movie. I really don't, though. Like, it's kind of boring. As soon as we get to Earth, Sam Jackson shows up and brings a little bit more character to it. And I like that we get to see Nick Fury before the Avengers and how he's changed and how his character evolves. But because Captain Marvel's character is so emotionless, there's not really anything that ties us to this movie or makes us want to keep watching. I feel like her character is just, she's powerful because she is. There's been different press releases saying that Captain Marvel is actually going to be leading the Avengers one day, but I really don't think that in this movie or in any of the movies that we've seen her, that she has done anything to deserve that. Much like I didn't think that Bucky deserved the shield, and I'm really glad they gave it to Sam. I think that we need to see Captain Marvel do more in order to earn that title. I really couldn't talk about this movie without talking about its biggest flaw, by far, the fact that the cat scratched out Nick Fury's eye, and that's why he has an eye patch. Why? Why did we bring the cat into it? Why are we turning one of the most badass characters in comic book history into a punchline for this movie? It is so annoying to me. Like all movies, Captain Marvel has its pros and it has its cons. I just think that the cons slightly outweigh the pros. But it's not a bad film. Okay, up next we have Ant-Man and the Wasp. When I'm watching this movie, my thought process is, what is happening? Honestly, like, they're trying so hard to explain the quantum realm and quantum mechanics to us, and all we want to see is Ant-Man shrinking, growing, fighting, and then having a compelling villain. All of the quantum realm stuff is so confusing, and I still don't understand how Scott was like tied to Michelle Pfeiffer so that he could communicate through her to their daughter, and then they like rescue her, like how she survived that. It's so confusing. But I think that the major problem with this movie is the villain, Ghost. Her backstory is kind of weird, her powers are kind of weird, and her whole character is just kind of weird. We've got different things to keep track of, like her backstory, what's going on in the quantum realm. Scott's on home arrest, so he has to get back in time. But this movie is really fun. This is an Ant-Man film. It's really creative in the way that they grow and shrink everything, and they even turn a building into like a suitcase. I feel like Ant-Man and the Wasp was the directors and the producers going, oh, okay, people like the humor in Ant-Man 1. Let's bring that same humor into Ant-Man 2. And they do that. They do a really good job, and this is probably one of the most light-hearted MCU films, honestly. And in Ant-Man 1, we got a really simple story in that it's a heist story about them trying to accomplish a specific mission. And we liked that. In this one, they try and up the stakes. They try and make it more of like an Avenger-level threat. But I think they kind of failed in that aspect. Overall, I think Ant-Man and the Wasp was not necessarily an attempt at making a great Marvel film. It wasn't supposed to crack the top 5, but it's supposed to be an enjoyable family movie to watch, and I think that they accomplished that very well. Alright, so up next we have Spider-Man Homecoming. Okay, one thing before we start, I love Spider-Man. I love the comics, I love the Tobey Maguire films, Andrew Garfield films. Right there. Spider-Man is one of my favorite characters ever created. He's very relatable, he's got awesome superpowers, he's got one of the best set of villains. He's just really interesting to learn about. So when I learned that he was going to be in the MCU, like everybody else, I got really excited. For the most part, I think that they did a pretty good job of portraying Spider-Man. Tom Holland does a really good job at portraying Peter Parker as a teenager. And a lot of people are happy about that, and they want him to be a teenager, and they want him to have that childish aspect to him as a superhero. It makes him more relatable, and it makes him more likable. And for this movie, I think it works out really well. I think that the humor lands, I think that the characters get developed really well, and I think that the friendship between Peter and Ned is awesome. When it comes to the characters, I think that they did really well in this movie. There are a few problems with this movie, however. One of them is Spider-Man's suit. I'm not a big fan of him being teched out and having all of the Jarvis Iron Man tech, because Spider-Man's not about that. He's supposed to be super smart, make his own suit, make his own web shooters, and he's supposed to feel very human. So Tony Stark is his mentor figure. I like that. But what I don't like is that they kind of turn him into like that father figure, and they almost replace, no, they totally do, they replace Uncle Ben, the very reason for Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man. He's not in these movies at all. And I get it, people don't want to see an origin story and they don't want everything to be repeated exactly the same. It's been done before. But completely removing him from the film, I think, does disservice to the character and to the movie. There's not even like a cameo or anything. What I do like in this movie, however, is that they use the Vulture as the villain, and specifically the way that Michael Keaton portrays him as just a normal guy who's been done wrong and is trying to take something back. He's not like a big universal villain that is going to take a superhero to take down, but he's just a normal guy. At the same time, he's a really cool villain. It's a nice dynamic that he's like the suburban dad, but then he can flip the switch and be a diabolical villain and like try and kill people. I feel like the very essence of Peter Parker and the very essence of Spider-Man is that things go wrong in his life, and usually it's because of him being Spider-Man, but he still chooses to be a superhero and to do the right thing because he is just a good kid. In this movie, I feel like everything's kind of handed to him. Till the very last act of the movie where he's at prom and makes the right decision, that's very Spider-Man. But in this movie, I feel like because of all of the tech and because of all the Iron Man references, and even the fact that the villain comes from Iron Man, Peter Parker is kind of handed everything and there's no consequences, there's no real stakes, and there's no real responsibility. He ditches Ned at a party and Ned just forgives him. He ditches Liz at prom and she just forgives him. If this were like the comic book or the other Spider-Man movies, there would have to be some sort of restitution and Peter Parker accepting that responsibility. It's definitely not the worst Spider-Man movie out there. I really like this film actually. It's just not my favorite of all time. Alright guys, so we made it to my top 3 of the Phase 3 Marvel movies. If you liked the video so far, go ahead and drop a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel and you'll get lots more. Alright, at number 3 we have Doctor Strange. Thor introduced us to the mystical aspects of the MCU, but Doctor Strange flings that door wide open. I love the special effects in this movie. I think that the CGI is almost flawless. The sequence where the Ancient One is showing Stephen Strange about everything he doesn't know is, honestly, it's a total trip. If you were high and watching this movie, I'd feel so sorry for you. But I think that this movie does a really good job of showing the character of Stephen Strange. He's a surgeon, he's completely rich, everybody loves him, and he's doing everything perfectly, and he has everything he ever wanted in life. It does a really good job of showing him at his high and the lowest of lows. When he gets his hands broken and he has to try every procedure and it's just getting worse, and then he starts losing his money, and then he loses his girlfriend, I don't really know. Then he goes to Kamar-Taj, meets the Ancient One, and his mind is blown. I would compare this movie to kind of like Iron Man 1, in that the story and the origin of Doctor Strange is actually similar to Tony Stark, but it's got that humor without like necessarily trying to be funny like Guardians does. There's just little moments that, like, if you don't pay attention for a second, you'll miss them, honestly. I think that Kaecilius is kind of like a villain, honestly. Like, he does his job, he does everything he's supposed to, and he's like an acolyte for Dormammu. Dormammu is just a CGI monster villain that we don't really see, and he's like threatening the Earth and everything. But I like that we get a little bit of an insight into who Kaecilius was, why he's doing what he's doing, and why he hates the Ancient One. Another problem I have with Doctor Strange is the romance between Rachel McAdams and Benedict Cumberbatch. It's just not very believable. I think that there's not really time for it in the movie, and I honestly forget that Rachel McAdams is in the MCU, like, often. I think that Doctor Strange tells a really faithful story to the comic books, and I'm glad he was introduced into the MCU, and I think that they did a really good job at this movie, honestly. And Benedict Cumberbatch was the perfect casting. Okay, and our runner-up is Thor Ragnarok. This movie is directed by Taika Waititi, and he takes a totally different direction to Thor, and he lets Chris Hemsworth be himself. This movie is actually like 75% improvised. All of the little jokes, all of the little nods are actually just things that Chris Hemsworth or Tom Hiddleston came up with in the moment. And I think that's why all the jokes land, is because it feels very real and it feels like it matches the circumstance perfectly. Fun fact, that scene where Thor first sees Hulk.
Yes! We know each other. He's a friend from work.
That line actually came from a kid who was a part of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, visited the set, and came up with that line for the movie. I like the new direction that this movie takes with Thor, and that it's not so serious and dark like the Dark World, but going from that to this is kind of jarring. I love the different interactions that Thor has with Loki and with Valkyrie and with the Hulk, and I think it all blends together really well, and I love that they went to Sakaar and we got that little nod, and then we get to meet Korg, who's one of my favorite characters in the MCU, honestly. Like, he's so minuscule in the thick of it all, but he's just so hilarious. His voice is so iconic, and that's actually Taika Waititi doing that. I wouldn't say that this is very true to the comics, however, as far as the adaptation. Sakaar is actually a place where Hulk goes, and we get the Planet Hulk arc. Hela is actually supposed to be Loki's daughter. There's a bunch of different little things. But because they do such a good job at telling the story that they came up with, I forgive it all. It's a really good movie. It's really fun to watch. I think Hela is actually a very compelling villain, and she's probably one of the most powerful, or was. The scene where she breaks Mjolnir is like so sad for Thor, and it's honestly so sad for us, the audience, because they open the movie with this sweeping shot of Mjolnir just taking out like hundreds of demons, and now we don't get to see that anymore. Probably my biggest problem with the movie is just that it doesn't know what it's trying to be, and I'll explain that. There are different scenes where Hela is just completely murdering everyone. They take out the Warriors 3, Hogun dies, there's like Asgard's on fire, and then it eventually explodes, and every time they do that, they don't give the audience long enough to kind of soak it all in and go, oh my gosh, that actually just happened. Because they follow that right off with a joke, a piece of humor, something to make the audience forget it all. You know, as the Asgardians are watching their city burn and watching Asgard be destroyed, that should be a big moment for us and for our characters. And we get a moment where Korg is like, as long as the foundations are attacked, we can rebuild. And then it's humor, and he says, oh no. Oh, nope. Those foundations are gone. Sorry. It's moments like that that kind of draw you away. I also would have liked to see Hulk be Hulk the entire film. I don't really think that Mark Ruffalo brought his A-game to this film. Maybe he's just not as funny as Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston. I don't know. Also, side note, Jeff Goldblum as the Grand Master, that's just perfect. I love Jeff Goldblum. I think he does a great job. And I hope we get to see him again in some other movies. Okay, and at number 1, finally, we have Black Panther. Now, I debated back and forth between which movie would get the number 1 spot, Thor or Black Panther. But I think Black Panther won simply because it has one of the best villains in the MCU. I think that Eric Stevens, Killmonger, is awesome. He's ultimately right and changes the hero's opinion in the end, and that's one of the coolest things a villain can do. Make us feel for him and make us know that he's correct, and he's almost not a villain at that point. It also has a really compelling story, and that it's all about T'Challa trying to decide what kind of king he's going to be. I think that all of the characters bring their A-game, and they really feel like they all belong in this country of their own. I love that we get to go through and just explore the Wakandan culture, and then we have the Jabari and the different tribes. They have really clever ways of doing exposition without shoving it in our face by showing Martin Freeman's character all there is about Wakanda and about Vibranium. I love the little Lord of the Rings callback between Andy Serkis and Martin Freeman. I think that the fight scenes and the action are actually pretty good in this movie. However, there's some different parts where the CGI, because it's black on black or because it was rushed, I don't know. There's just different moments where it doesn't look very good. It looks like a video game. But I think that my biggest problem with this movie is actually Black Panther himself. The idea of Vibranium as Captain America's shield is really cool in that it's a one-of-a-kind thing. Here, it's everywhere. It's all over their tech, it's all over their suits, it's all over their cars, and because of that, you never feel like they're actually in any danger. I think in Civil War they did a good job at humanizing him and making him more like a martial artist, where in this movie he is so teched out and his suit has the ability to absorb energy and then output it and just make huge explosions that I never feel like T'Challa's actually in danger or that he's going to lose or that he even has a chance to lose. I think it's very cool visually, but I think that it also takes away from these characters that we've learned to care for. I think that Black Panther is a beautiful film visually. It's really engaging with its action. I think that it has one of the best villains in the whole MCU, and I think it deserves its spot at number 1 on my list. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you liked the video, make sure to drop a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel to get some more. Make sure to hit that notification bell so you can know exactly when I'm going to drop my next video. Now that I've done all the phases of Marvel, we're going to go through all the Avengers film and we're going to be ranking those next. Comment down below and let me know your thoughts on the movies. Do you agree or disagree with my order, and what does your list look like? Alright, that's all for now guys. See ya.